It is January 5th, 2020. Happy New Year. This is Fancy Ramen, episode 144. Disco Malaise?
All disco all the time.
That's better, yeah.
Today's episode is heavily, if not completely focused on the classic RPG game, or at least that's what it's being lauded as, Disco Elysium. Neil and I really dig into the guts of this game, what we like about it, and a lot of things that we don't like, or at least can constructively criticize. All that and a quick 3-minute talk about Train to Busan on this episode of Fancy Ramen. It definitely interrupts the flow. And some of these conversations, like the check's deep in the conversation, like you're probably making 3 to 4 dialogue selections before you get to some items. I can think of the case of one person where like it's about 5 or 6 that options that you have to string through to get to a physicality check. And it was just, I knew I was going to fail at it if I didn't change my clothes because I have shit physicality stats. They're very bad, which also makes me, there's a lot of barriers if you're like a physically weak character. There's a lot of things that like I've perceived or found. There's all these things that I could take advantage of that I've unlocked with other skills, but I'm so physically frail and weak that I just have to look at them and be like, that would be a good alternate angle, but you're an absolute grub when it comes to like pulling open a door or like kicking down a barrier or something. That's a shame. I just recorded. I was actually going to make a joke that was, "Oh, do you want me to hit record?" But I've been recording the past 12 minutes of this.
Well, crap. Now I'm recording. I'm sure I can probably I'm sure I can probably utilize some of your audio though.
Well, you could utilize some of mine perhaps, but I don't have any of yours recorded.
We'll see what happens.
You're going to have me like speaking into the ether with literally no prompt for each thought that develops. I will sound so crazy with that setup.
So we're capping off this episode because we're still on this topic. We are both maybe you're not necessarily passionate about Disco Elysium's shortcomings, but I definitely have felt a few of the things.
I mean, I want to critique it in the sense that I hope that there is another attempt at a game like this. I hope that this is not the last time we see something like Disco Elysium in the near future. And so like critique and thought about how to approach it, how it could be improved is valuable and contributes to like the production of something better. Because I mean, as we know, like this is one of the industry staple podcasts for game design and figuring out what the common man thinks.
Maybe the biggest thing that I'm finding myself displeased with, like we've already talked to some degree about the clothing, the TLDR, if any of the past audio doesn't make it from you, is that I'm not necessarily happy that you have to exit dialogue and re-enter dialogue to equip things. So it feels like there's literally no downside to most of your checks being able to when you're able to exit most conversations and then change your outfit to accommodate that check. And the other thing of it too is that the random checks that occur in a conversation, you can end up recreating most of those just by changing the outfit and going back into the conversation and revisiting the conversation topics or the dialogue branches that you've already done. So if you fail like a Half-Light, I think it's
Half-Light. Yeah.
If you fail a Half-Light check, you go out and then you put on whatever stupid ass sunglasses you have and gloves that increase that. You go and do that choice again, and I'm pretty sure you can get like a failed check, which is just for, conversation purposes, inner dialogue. You can actually get it to succeed at that point. So it feels like there's hardly ever any...
Ooh, I actually don't think so. I think if you change your outfit, it doesn't allow you to reapproach a check. until you've actually put an extra point into the skill.
So I'm actually not talking about the checks, like the white check or red check.
You're talking about the background or the hidden checks.
Yeah, the checks that occur in your inner dialogue.
Yeah, okay. I get what you're saying. And you're right in that case.
So the other thing, speaking on that same topic, the dialogue branches, I feel like this game doesn't do very well. And I noticed it with a specific egghead puzzle. Spoilers, by the way. Is that when you go down a branch, no matter what, if you've chosen a bit of dialogue before, it gets grayed out, or kind of like a visited link already, like hyperlink on a website, it becomes like a darker red.
It loses color.
The issue I have with that approach is that it makes certain dialogue branches seem like they've already been explored all the way, when you could still have light dialogue options or unchosen dialogue options further in. And my main issue is that sometimes when you go up to a certain person, or when we have the egghead conversation where it's a 2-branch option at the start, and then it keeps going down further and further branches, like every choice you have becomes 2 more branches, and there's only one outcome out of what is potentially, I think, 16 or 14-ish possible outcomes. Only one of those will actually progress you in the side quest. So it's only one instance or one circumstance here, so you can let it fly, but like that in itself does not encourage necessarily thinking through your responses. It just kind of encourages you to like complete
click through everything.
Yeah, exactly. Which again, it's egghead. Who fucking cares? It's not that big of a deal. But my bigger issue is when you talk to potential witnesses, because this game is relatively open in what order you accomplish certain things. You can talk to a key witness at the start of the game and then come back to the key witness later with new knowledge. And with that new knowledge, there's a chance that your ability to ask someone about that note is further in the dialogue branches. So you actually have to go back through choices that are already grayed or, darkened out because you've done them before, to unveil new branches of dialogue to explore.
Right.
And like there are a couple different ways that you can neatly circumvent this problem. And the first one is to either introduce new topics earlier in the branch or at the root of the conversation, which happens relatively often, but not always. And that therein lies the issue I have. Or that if new dialogue has opened up, you either change the font to a different color, a third color altogether, or return it back to the original bright red color, or have a bracketed tag or something. I just find that there are other ways you can accomplish this without necessarily...
Yeah, even an asterisk before like the number, just to note, like, you could bold the asterisk, or I guess return the color to, or have the color of the asterisk before this option, but keep it grayed out to even indicate like you've been down this path. There may be new opportunities or options within the branch.
The game doesn't necessarily do a great job of setting up conditionals for the wide branch of witnesses that you can ask at the start of the game. Like, the game opens up, you have to do a few key things, but really there are, I'm gonna say, like 5 directions you can take your investigation. That's kind of an estimate. What I mean by this is that there's essentially 2 negative results with the way the game's currently programmed, and this isn't necessarily like a programming thing, although in a couple cases it kind of is. It's kind of more of like a foresight into how the story could unveil problem. I guess the more technical issue first. So I started the game 2 different times. The first time I died of a heart attack reaching for my tie. The second time I died in the cold doing something. I don't remember what it was, but heart attack, died.
You're just out too late in the cold, perhaps?
I'm not sure. It was something I did outside that then led my character to have some sort of like aneurysm or heart attack or something. But in that second lifespan of Harry Dubois, or Dubois, I don't know.
It would be Dubois.
Harry Dubois.
Area Dubois.
He did a thorough investigation and interrogation of Kuno, which is by far one of the least desirable things you can ever do. But so, I mean, I like fully got all the information I could out of him. So my third time through, with one more point into body to make sure I wasn't going to die entirely, like immediately. Actually, what am I saying? I was still... No, yeah. I did put 2 into body at that point, or physique. I went and talked to Kuno and just got the main points I needed. And it went through the rest of the game, because like there's not really a good way to skip through text that I remember off the top of my head, at least. So outside of just clicking frantically,
there isn't. Yeah, you just have to click through it.
So I went through what I thought was everything I could from him, and I opened up my journal later on, like a few days in, to realize that I still needed to actually ask Kuno about the missing body armor. So I'm like, well, I guess I just need to ask him about the armor. It's fine. I've already found some armor. It's not a big deal.
And were you looking for like an orange dialogue option to pop up that wasn't there?
Well, I asked him about the body armor, and he was talking about how the boots were too hard to get off. And the body's already gone at this point. The body's nowhere. It's not here anymore.
Oh.
I talked to another NPC about the boots. And so now I have a journal entry saying, like, retrieve the boots from the corpse.
But the corpse is gone.
Yeah, I already did it. I've already ID'd the body from the boots through a long process of calling this operator back and forth, or calling the operator, asking for information, giving her a day, calling back, doing that 3 times to get more information on the boots. The boots have been thoroughly checked. I have done my due diligence there,
and the boots aren't there anymore.
I'm gonna have that journal entry now.
Yeah. What's really interesting about that too is I know that I have a journal entry that essentially I got a heads up in one way or another. And I can't remember how the game does it mechanically, but it does note that like getting the boots is going to be very difficult and you might not be able to do it. Just like knowing that getting the boots is going to be tricky. And because my Harrier Dubois is even weaker willed and stomached than your Harrier Dubois, I feel like I've started this process like quite a bit behind you. Like I'm definitely lagging on completing the autopsy of the body. But I know that if I start the autopsy with Kim, the body's probably going to be dealt with. So I'm leaving it on the ground, just like rotting there right now until I can come back later in the night, do the autopsy, and then steal the boots. And what's going to be hard about that, I guess, too, is I'm going to wear the boots in front of Kim later because I'm trying to complete the armor set. And so I don't know how that will resolve. But it is interesting. I know that I was alerted in one way or another within the game that getting the boots is going to be tricky and require some finesse. So
the body is down, though, right?
The body's off. Yeah, the body's off the cable or the strap, the cargo strap that's holding him up. It's just now down on the ground. And Kim is like, okay, let's begin the autopsy. And I was like, hold on a minute. And then we've ran around town for like 8 or 9 more hours with the body down.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. Actually, before I do that, I want to talk about one other thing. And that is that when you visit other witnesses far later in the game, because like, again, you kind of, if you're a detective, you don't want to just find the shortest path to the solution. Like, you need to vet your sources, right?
Absolutely.
So I went through a bunch of different I'm using key witnesses. They're witnesses that are brought to your attention in one way or another early on. I talked to a bunch. I got pretty deep in the investigation. We've both gotten to this point. We've talked about bullet trajectories. Well, I decided like maybe I should clean up like some of these other witnesses that I haven't talked to, like Mr. Evrart. And when you talk to Mr. Evrart, it's like your character loses all information that he's had about the advancements in the case.
Yeah.
And I understand the idea of keeping Evrart in the dark about certain things. That's perfectly fine. The problem, though, is that like there's no acknowledgement, and the script doesn't necessarily yield the idea that my character, Harry, knows more about the investigation. It's not a choice of me concealing information. It's just Harry,
Being
for some
forced
reason,
to,
has
yeah.
forgotten things or something.
Yeah. And so what you're looking for there, right, is like an option where it's like maybe I can pressure him to like hint at releasing some information specifically, but there's no option or any acknowledgement of that.
Or maybe I'm trying to find out what he knows. Like the idea of justifying not telling him outright what you found out is that you want to know what he knows.
Mm-hmm.
Because who knows, maybe he's part of the hit in some way. Maybe not entirely. Well, I mean,
You want to be
I'm
able
sure.
to, yeah, you want to be able to ask like a leading question, for instance.
Yeah, I want to be able to that's again, maybe this is just the mystery element of the game is not the focus and why this is not important to the writers or the developers of this game. But like, I feel like it's an essential component of investigating a case, whether or not this is supposed to be a mystery game, which, as we talked about last episode quite a bit, this doesn't feel like a mystery game. Like there's always a chance for a plot twist to happen, but like it feels like everything is very.
I think the game is upfront with you about everything that you learn. And a mystery game might be more withholding in a lot of information.
But there was another point that we were leading towards that I wanted to touch upon.
I mean, we are leading towards just the fact that interacting with all of these key witnesses means back and forth traversal on the map over and over. And especially with witnesses that are behind, say, one or two loading screens or doors, it is super tedious to find out that they don't have any more useful information once you've delved like a step further into the case. So you step in, through a loading screen to a midway and then hit another loading screen to get to that person and then have to exit through those two loading screens again. It's like all within a 5-minute period, maybe even a 3-minute period, you could have loading screens for a total of like 30 seconds or something, which is a substantial amount of your time invested in those small microcosms of playing the game.
And there's two problems with this. The first one is that the game acknowledges at certain points in time that shortcuts are good to have. Like one specific point I can think of is when you go to the tent outside of the church, there's a drawbridge that you push down, meaning that you no longer have to run around the outlet peninsula thing to get to you basically have to run at 270 degrees in a circle.
Yeah.
Like a pseudo circle to get to the tent.
Quick question: do you always run? Because the way you're saying is run. So are you always double clicking? Me too. And I wonder how much. Because I've had even Kim comment on it, like, "Oh, we do a lot of running," and I'm like, "Yeah, I only have so much time on the case." I'm surprised that there's no penalty or nothing more about your character running besides Kim's acknowledgement, because if Kim wouldn't have acknowledged it, I wouldn't have thought about it very much. But since he did note that we're running a lot, I'm like, is there ever going to be any sort of consequence for all this running?
Maybe a heart attack.
If I've gone 5 days sprinting up and down Martinez, then I'm probably going to be fine.
It's one of those things, though, where I imagine that there's potentially a conditional flag that raises when you run a bunch like we have, right? And then everyone talks, like then Kim will just, on occasion, when the flag is there and it is the right time, he makes a joke or a quip about having to run a shit ton.
Yeah.
Like that becomes a thing, right?
And it shows a lot of like intentionality or thoughtfulness behind developing that. But
the problem, though, is that like the opposite, if you don't run any place, like maybe he wouldn't make the comment, or maybe he would talk about how you guys take your time all the time,
nice
or whatever.
And easy. Yeah.
But more importantly, the implication is that they are acknowledging that you have to run all over the place because the game is so fucking boring running from point A to point B. And it's not like the act of you running from place to place is not necessarily a big deal. Like in other games, it gives you a sense of scale and scope, and it's part of the journey. But other games also have other elements to make it more entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And to couple that, most of those games also introduce fast travel options.
Mm-hmm. Which
The
this
thing-
game might have a serious issue with, especially when you're changing stats and then walking through new areas with maybe new inland empire or perception skills.
But to be quite frank with you, I almost feel like it would be of no consequence to not get those second options. Because let's say you fast travel from anywhere in the place to the fishing village. Like, you're probably still going to scope out the fishing village to some extent to look for coins and look for other things. Because, loot does seem to repopulate on a daily or couple daily basis. Which, I still have not used the free room. So I have to scavenge a lot to pay off my freaking hostel room.
Have you turned into a soulless capitalist trying to pay your $20 bill every night?
I haven't. It's all about finding postcards and selling them. And you get an item that lets you unlock basically any locked device with the exception of doors. And that opens up your revenue to new bounds. There's so many postcards to sell.
But the other question I guess I have then is are you selling all of the other items that you get that aren't tools or interactables?
I sell everything.
So you're missing out on a lot of bonuses for checks later or stuff that you can use in your investigation.
Oh yeah, so I will keep certain things that I believe it to be possibly useful.
Yeah.
But I'm not buying outfits, I'm not buying clothing unless it's dirt cheap or I can steal it. Sometimes I steal things. Especially if the person proves to be a scumbag to begin with. I no longer feel the need to be good to them.
Well, there are very few people in this game or world that I think appear to be non-scumbags.
Right. Well,
even the people who are kind of helpful and I like code to be somewhat scumbags, in my opinion.
We'll maybe approach that topic later, because
okay.
Or maybe a post finish conversation we can have with the game. But my point though is that you still tend to do a bit of scavenging and shit. But once the problem is that the game is designed to pass time through conversation and action alone. You do not pass time running from point A to point B.
Yeah,
no time
which is
gets passed.
insane. It's really annoying, actually.
So that brings up another thing, just really quickly to say that when a game uses distance to convey scale or scope, that's cool, that's fine. When it takes you potentially days in time or in-game days to go across the entire map of the Breath of the Wild, it gives you a sense of how big, and it's also pretty fucking big, but how big the world is. In this game, the sense of scale and scope is lost because there's no downside outside of the time you spend talking to someone, from running from the the tower thing at the west end of the islands to Evrar on the east side in his docking station thing or whatever, his harbor. There's no downside to running from point west to east except for the time it wastes on us players.
So just to confirm with you, it is the case that movement has a no time penalty or just a super minor time penalty?
I haven't noticed anything.
Okay.
I
think I've seen the clock tick while I'm moving, but I mean it can still be argued to your point that it is a super small loss of time.
I remember doing something over at the boardwalk and it being 22:30 or 10:30, so to speak. Finishing that and having to Kim telling Harry that they needed to go to the Whirling in Rags to talk to someone, but they better hurry because it might be, it's pretty late. So it's 22:30 and
When
it
you
was
arrived.
22:30 when we arrived too. And
that's a big distance to cross. That's fair.
That is half the map, if not a little more than that, because you're going from almost the west side of the map to the center, if not a little further east.
Mm-hmm.
And to get back to the whole shortcut side of things, you push down a drawbridge at the tents, and that it does two things. The first one is it encourages you to go around the landmass and talk to a cell, and maybe that's the primary reason they didn't have the bridge down at the start. But it also allows you some convenience, and this is maybe not something they really thought of. It gives you the convenient passage between the church and the tents, which isn't that far to begin with, but it's nice being able to make that track.
I think
back
it
and forth.
absolutely is intentional, though, considering that in the tent you can get access and technically a quest to check out the church.
Right. So they have the idea, you would imagine, of shortcuts being a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Evrart, going to him, on the other hand,
Pain in the ass.
yeah, even if it's your second or third time or whatever, you have to go up the wall, scale up the wall of the harbor, go into a building, out of a building, then go down a set of stairs, climb onto a bunch of containers and go into a container, and then go up a set of stairs from that container into his room.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they could have just opened the gate or done something, given you the keys to the gate or like a side door beside the gate. Because like in the real world, like a harbor gate is not going to be the only way into a set of walls, because you'd want to close the gate at some point in time so trucks and shit can't get through, but you still want your guards or people to go through, right?
Right. There's
So,
also the argument that if you have already established in the game the ability to move these cargo containers to free up platforms, you could perhaps move cargo containers to create a shortcut platform.
Or like move his container, because he talks about moving his container right to the start.
Yep.
Holy crap. It's so annoying.
And
my
it's
head
also
hurts.
it's also part of the argument for Evrart that he wants to be inaccessible to the rich woman in the boat. But he still is inaccessible, even if you just put him next to like Renee's old guard tower, or if you move his shipping container so it's just right outside the offices, it would still be inaccessible to her, because I think you needed a key or something to get in there in the first place.
Or you could put his fucking bodyguard muscle guy right in front of the door, like prevent anyone from coming in.
Who has one of my I just love the voice acting on Measurehead for his accent. Pretty much everything else about Measurehead is terrible, but his accent is a delight to hear whenever he speaks.
I think they did good in designing that character. Like, I fucking hate him.
Yeah, he's a
which
bad
is the
man.
intention.
Yeah, but he's interesting, and he has a charisma that a bad guy needs.
I don't know. I would go so far as to say that he's maybe the only interesting antagonist, and he's not even necessarily an antagonist.
You don't feel that way about the Hardy Boys?
No, I don't view him as an antagonist.
Okay, yeah, I would actually say that I guess I don't view them as antagonists now either, but I thought that they did a good job of making the Hardy Boys like seem very antagonistic at the start, right? Because they're copping to the murder almost immediately when you speak to them. That's no spoiler for anyone playing this game. They're like incriminated almost right away. And the development of the case from there, with Titus being like more and more available to like empathize with or to understand. I like that. I think that there are very good characters in this game too. They're interesting and they have some depth to them that gets revealed through your continuation of the case.
So this is a topic that I've become a little more familiar with. With some of the other games I've been playing and shows I've been watching, and that's like the difference between quality of character and quality of character growth. I think there are quite a few very interesting characters in this game. But and I'm not trying to refute your point or anything. I agree with you entirely. I think the Hardy Boys, which by the way, the name is
Clever.
Yeah, it's something. It's fun because it actually yields a little truth to their, like, the fact that they're basically the local police, if you will. But the other shame with the game, and granted, it's not necessarily trying to accomplish this, but I don't think it has been like a single aspect of character growth in this game outside of the protagonist, because we just don't have enough time to spend with all of the characters or any of the specific characters.
Agreed. We're 5 days in for both of us, and so it would be wild to expect that much character growth in the first place. But
Kim,
it's arguable that Kim undergoes some.
It's like Kim's growth is maybe just
tied to yours.
Yeah, or like it's all a reflection of him getting used to the main character's actions.
Yes. Which is still growth, I guess. I don't know. I'm willing to argue it's still growth.
But there's nothing like principally changing about him. It seems more like, depending on how you play the game, that it's Kim encouraging the growth of Harry more than anything.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't necessarily ever seem like you're getting Kim to like loosen up.
He's not changing his principles.
Yeah, it feels like Kim's capable of loosening up all the time. It's just that in this professional capacity, he's not necessarily going to start dancing. And when you do get him to dance, it's not like you're actually changing him. You just manage to get him to dance right then and there for that moment. But I don't know. Were there any other big points I had on that?
I can't tell you.
The experience system is pretty screwed up. You alluded to this earlier, but like you can just bank on level ups. So if there's a check that you can't hit, you just choose to level it up again after putting on all your equipment. You don't hit it, you level it up again, and rinse and repeat.
Yeah, you just bank those points until you need them. Though I would say that they're, at least early game, are definitive advantages to just like being highly skilled in one or two categories. Like investing your points early because they give you a better lead than, like, I think evenly distributing your points and then trying to pull at each thread that becomes available. But as I've developed later into the game, now I have those like very well developed strengths. And so now when I hit something where it's like, oh, you're at 42% for the success rate, let's change our clothes, give it a shot. And then if we fail, maybe we can get all the way up to 75% chance on the next roll when we skill up.
It's hard for me to like really evaluate how much I like the level up system, because you can start out with a character that's very different than what they eventually become.
Right.
Like my fragile detective is now actually starting to become more hard-nosed now with like pain tolerance and endurance. And it's like, what is going on here? How did 5 days transform this man into like a tough-ass cop?
You remembered that you're not supposed to die to bright light and that you can throw a punch or two.
Yeah, well, turning on the light and then your hangover destroys you. When you only have 3 HP to begin with.
Funny surprises, yeah.
But the other thing I don't necessarily like about it is that, because like if you're gonna meta game at all, you want experience. It's important because that will unlock more options down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to keep getting experience, and because getting those checks or succeeding in some of those checks rewards you with better writing, it's not even just an aspect of wanting to succeed for the sake of succeeding. It's wanting to succeed to appreciate more of the game.
Agreed.
So the game encourages you to amass as much experience as you can, which also makes you want to go and do side quests, regardless of how fucking boring they can be. But more importantly, it encourages you to just spam through every single option to scour as much experience as you can, because that 5 and 10 experience you get by asking stupid questions to someone that are not relevant at all is important to making sure you get that banked up set of experience or levels.
Yeah.
So, like, I'll find myself asking questions to things I already know the answer to statements I don't believe in. I'll start political discussions just for the sake of seeing if there's experience at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes there is.
Yeah.
Part of me wonders how good this game would be if they just gave you like more skill points up front. Maybe got rid of the entire 4-stat system and just gave you a bunch of skill points to throw in. Still had the clothing system.
And still had the skill distribution, just not having the base.
Because I don't necessarily think the base... I think the base is a good way to start the character off in a certain path, but like the 4 stats themselves, I don't think have any use afterwards. They're just kind of there. And all you would do in return is you maybe change a few things with the thought system, the not conceptualization, but you know the different thoughts that you bring on.
Yeah, the thought cabinet, and I think they are conceptualizations, is what they call each thought.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
no, maybe not. I'm getting that mixed up with the skill conceptualization. But
yeah, it's hard to remember exactly what it is, but like there's more than enough other things.
Believe. It's internalizing thoughts.
Internalizing. Okay. There are so many other things. Excuse me, that can affect your stats. I feel like if they took away or either just like made level ups a little more rare and tied it only to main events and maybe a few like some hand-picked side quests, it'd make the game more challenging maybe from a standpoint of how you have to approach things and maybe a little more interesting because I think as you get later and later into the game, it starts to feel more and more like your Harry probably becomes like every other Harry, with the exception of whether or not you're a good or bad cop.
Oh, yeah. A widening of the skill set also actually is sort of a converging of the character types.
Right, exactly. There was this really old adventure game that when I think about it more and more, this game's kind of like, we're talking like 90s. PC, you basically went to investigate or do things as well. I'm sorry, I don't know the name or anything, but
I think it's Pajama Sam.
if only. But the critical thing is that you selected your characters and you had like a cast of characters or from this team to choose from, and you had like a vampire. You know what? I can only think of the vampire right now, but it's a bunch of supernatural people that you could choose from.
Or one really ugly guy.
One freaking vampire. If you chose the vampire, he couldn't go out into direct sunlight, but he could become a bat or he could turn into mist and pass through doors and stuff.
Yeah.
So you could take like the thief to get through the door with a lockpick, or you could take the vampire to go through the door, or you could take neither of them and have to figure out how to get through the door that way. Like that game offered a lot more diversity in its playthrough because you hard locked yourself out of the other characters when you chose your team.
Yeah.
This game, like, it honestly feels more and more like it's becoming less and less diverse and more linear the more I play it.
Yeah, I think that probably is true. I have so many physicality checks that I can't possibly succeed at, that there's still something to be said that like my weak cop is completely just barred from certain options that I think would be very helpful and or have sped my investigation along intensely at a faster pace than they are now. Like I have a quest that I actually don't know how to complete it because I've maxed out this physical instrument trait, and it needs to be noted that I've maxed it out with 3 points, and my physicality is like 1, or I think my physicality is like 1 or 2, and so I have, I think like a plus 5 with my clothing and my skills, to try and pass this check, and I've got like a 28% success rate or something. Like I don't know how I'm going to overcome it, but it feels like it is a substantial and unavoidable barrier for the approach I've chosen to take on resolving a side quest in the church.
Can you tell me what the side quest is?
I need to open a frozen ice cream container to get to a off-site data module, and I just can't open said ice cream container even with all the bonuses and checks all the bonuses to the check that I've unlocked, and I cannot unlock any more physical instrument. And the only other option for me is to like get violent with someone, and I refuse to do that.
Oh, so let me guess. So you've already unplugged the power to it.
Yeah, and given it a day to thaw, I think.
And you've already... So the one thing that you're waiting, that you don't necessarily have a better tool.
I have the best tool possible.
You can tell me what it is, because I'm pretty sure I have that tool too.
I have the like super multi-tool.
Like the thing that's like huge. They say it's a multi-tool, and I'm like, oh, it's a Leatherman, great. And then it turns out it's the Leatherman the size of a surfboard.
Stereo. Yeah.
Wow, it's still only 28?
I mean, I don't know. It's locked for me now. But it was low. Like, I didn't have much of a chance even with all of that. And I don't know if it's one of those where it's like, if I come back in 2 days, it's like, it's definitely thought out. Here's +5 to the check. But currently, as things stand, it is just locked, which means no resolving the church part.
That is a bummer.
I know. I don't know what to do. I've made like really huge progress otherwise. I honestly have made huge progress with the druggies in the tent because I've almost pumped it up to the extreme with the beat that we're making. But I just don't think that there's any further to go until I fashion my compromise together about adjusting the church.
You made a beat with them?
Yeah, I've been working on a beat with them.
I did not do that.
I had to fish a electronic reel tape out of a tree for part 1.
That goes to show you like my level of patience.
There's a lot of hidden stuff in this game too, though. That's crazy. Like I went back and looked at an object that I had exhausted all the dialogue on, and I just tried a low chance skill check, and I passed it, and it gave me some more stuff to do that I had already done, really. And so I returned to it shortly, like a little later in the day after I had done some more things, and just double checked to make sure that all of the things it was suggesting I had already checked off as much as possible. I returned to it, and it's literally the same check. And so I do it and I pass it again. And all of a sudden it opens up like 2 new branches of options to access an area that only like earlier in that day and playing the game that I thought maybe this is accessible or I can get into here. Like I think I actually see an inaccessible like staircase or something, and maybe I can access it somewhere around this area. And so by doing this check twice, it's now you have 2 different entrances you can take. One entrance seems physically risky, and the other entrance needs you to have physicality that you are extremely weak at, and therefore have no chance at like succeeding with.
I'm actually not sure what place you're talking about now.
Okay. Well, I don't think this is going to spoil much for you, but for people who are playing the game along at this point, I mean, hopefully they hear the 5-day mark and they think, uh-oh, these guys are probably going to go over some resolutions in the case that I don't want to hear.
There's going to be a spoiler warning for sure.
Yeah, and this absolutely is a spoiler warning because I don't know how big of a thing this could be. I had to stop playing to record the podcast, but it seems big. It seems like I could get some like pretty valuable information or progression in the case. And that is the electrical works building has a big billboard that this man and his child are staring at. And
they constantly keep going back there too.
I know. It's like they're on vacation or they're taking a break, but they've been just staring at the billboard for days now. It doesn't make any sense to me. That poor kid should be bored out of his mind by now. But regardless, like after looking at it and activating a shivers skill twice, activating the shivers, having it tell me like, go explore this peninsula and whatnot, and then return, activate the shivers check again. There's an underground pipe that I can try that led me to a like rust over door that I can't open because I'm physically frail. And then there's a ladder that Kim seems to think will spell my certain doom if I climb it.
So I take it you're not trying to like save scum. So it's not like you're gonna save the game.
I am
climb
not
up a ladder and die.
at all. I think this game would absolutely lose any of the things that make it special or entertaining if you save scum it.
Sure.
So
like I've already told you that the 2 times I've died, I just restarted.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's one of those.
I don't know if I'd still do that now, mind you. Like, different story. But so you don't want to take the ladder because if you die, you would feel cheap for going back to the save.
I mean, I don't know what else you're supposed to do. Like start a new game.
Yeah, start a new game. It's this is what you would call a rogue. Not really.
Yeah, I guess that's true, but that's so much time. Like at this point, I'm doing myself and the podcast a disservice by, I mean, like what I would do then in that case, right, is I wouldn't try it again. That's kind of what I've done instead. So it's like I have the opportunity to say climb the ladder again, and maybe there's a percentage chance I die. I look at it as like, oh, I won't try that then because I will die. Like assuming that it's kind of like, I think there were editions of Fire Emblem where you would save and the random number generator was already like loaded for the critical hit that was going to kill your most precious unit in one hit. And so you could reload the game as many times as you want, but on that enemy turn, they are going to crit against Rolf, your child sniper, and like murder him. So you either had to completely give up on that battle and reinitialize it or accept Rolf's fate is already set in stone. And so in this way, I'm like accepting that Harry's fate is set in stone. If he climbs the ladder, he will die. There are a couple times where the audio is just like painfully abrasive. Like I know that is the effect they're going for, but it's almost brutally unfair to like screech at me really hard and hurt my ears. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they could still have the effect, but maybe not to the magnitude that it's at in relation to the volume of the music and the other dialogue and audio and whatnot. Like if they're going to have like a screeching metal sound, maybe dampen it to below the like voiceover volume, so it's not so hurtful. Honestly, it's just like I can think of 1 or 2 times where I'm like, wow, this is really like, I feel punished for opening up this dialogue option or interacting with this thing.
I would say that like there are so many times where I find myself turning up and down. Like I've got my volume control right here to my side, and I'm just constantly moving it up and down as dialogue is going on. Like it's kind of a blessing in disguise that there is not actually that much voice dialogue in the game, because at some point I just have been keeping everything low and the music a little higher, and like the sound mix. Like it sucks that I can't hear some of the people that do a decent job voicing. Like Kim Katsuragi's fine, a few other characters are fine.
But if you speak to Classier and then you speak to Egghead, like it's going to hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And vice versa. If you speak to Egghead and then you speak to Classier, you're not going to hear her almost at all. And so I get like each one of them has a different tone, and there's even a context to why they have that volume. But for the player, like I think the player obviously picks up on that context without needing to be like bludgeoned by the difference in the audio.
You could pick it up from the portraits alone.
Yeah, that's exactly. Like there's enough context that I think that it was probably approached as a good idea. Is like this is how we have even like greater fidelity with the context we are trying to present. But it turns out to be very unpleasant for the player, or at least I find it that way. And it sounds like you would agree. And I think if I were to
Yep.
put most people, if I were to put the headphones on most people, I have a feeling that at the very least, they would agree that the audio is maybe not balanced as well as we expect or encounter in I think games normally with a bigger budget and development team, right? Like I'm also willing to forgive this somewhat. It's an indie game, but I've also never been hurt by any other indie games like audio quite like this.
It's yeah, it's definitely the weakest point of the game is the audio. And the music I don't think is necessarily bad, but like I've sat down and played this game multiple times now just with the audio practically off, listening to something else or listening to music or YouTube or listening to like a stream because it's that inconsequential.
Yeah, it's like I was listening to NPR podcasts when I was playing God of War.
This American Life with Ira Glass.
No, we're talking more like Planet Money, their economics podcast.
You're not a fan of This American Life?
I actually think that This American Life is probably one of the like what do I want to call it? It's like the cornerstone of podcasting. Like podcasting wouldn't be what it is today without without what Ira Glass and This American Life has done. Before I ever got into podcasting, this is the most small but like necessary passionate tangent I'll go on. When I was a student of journalism back in the day, my exposure to the type of like reporting and storytelling that This American Life did like was a super motivator for me to engage in journalism in the way I did and I do now.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's entirely when people talk about wanting to tell people stories, like it's like a cliche narrative that is used in like fiction and so forth when people talk about reporters or like, hey, main character, come on to our talk show and let's tell me your story. Like what they are mimicking or parodying is essentially like the format of this American Life.
What they do. Yeah. So I guess what I'd say is like I hold it in such high regard, and I'm sure that people will roll their eyes at me for it. I hold it in such high regard that oftentimes I will not listen to This American. I used to listen to it a lot, but I don't have the time where I can listen to those big blocks of like stories now. So I end up like sidelining it until a big road trip, and then I will listen to it.
So you can have your devoted attention.
Yeah, it feels really cheap, honestly, to like treat it as background audio or noise. And I'll do that with other podcasts, especially very informational podcasts, because they're also normally condensed in the way that I consume it. So if it's like 30 minutes or less, like I'm in for it. It can play while I'm brutally slaughtering dark elves in God of War or whatever. Or just, like dismembering Draugr while we're talking about the yield curve. But if we're gonna like get into storytelling or something, I save that solely for like long trips in the car or just like laying back and listening to the audio and focusing on nothing else.
Well, speaking of like interesting narratives and stories, I do kind of want to touch on the story of Disco Elysium real quick. And some of your experiences so far. Like we don't have to get too deep into it. I think
it's fine.
I think we're both like actually pretty close to potentially an ending if it's really coming up as soon as I think it is.
I only have one question before we progress, and that is, have you found or figured out where your gun is?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Have you?
I will have completed that leg, I think, by the end of today when I get back to playing. Like,
So
I'm just finishing up tracking down my gun.
You have a
rendezvous.
Okay, so I won't talk on that. Luckily, that's not the topic that I wanted to focus on, because I want to ask you about Ruby. Do you know who that is, right?
Yes.
Okay, you may not have met her yet.
I have not met Ruby yet.
Nor have I.
I have been the bloodhound sniffing her tracks.
When you talked about having to use the shivers check twice at that building, I also had an extremely low shivers check.
Uh-huh.
I am pretty fucking sure that check is scripted to always succeed. Because my check was like real low. Like, I don't remember how low. I don't know if it was the 2% or whatever.
3% I think is the lowest you can get.
Yeah, I don't know if it was that low, but it was low, and I passed both of them. And funny enough, because I already checked most of the coast beforehand, I did the shivers check, and then, he said, like, well, we already checked this place, yada, yada. And I'm just like, fuck it. Like, this is definitely it. My shivers keeps telling me it's it. So I just did the check right then and there, too.
Okay.
I'm so dissatisfied in some grand scale way. I am dissatisfied with the potential conclusion of Ruby being the killer out of lust or love or jealousy.
Until I meet her and interact with her, like, I don't feel like I have a grand concept of who she is. And so I was thinking about it too. Like, if I find her and she's innocent, but like pinning the crime on her solves everything, I'm putting this innocent woman like in cuffs, I think.
Ooh.
Which is insane, because I've tried to be a very moral and ethical cop besides that, but I'm just like, I think we're going to get into like a shooting war if I don't have something to put the case on.
Do you think Classe is lying?
I've caught her lying several times to me already.
Right.
She totally could be lying. I also think that it's established that Harry is obviously not around when the murder happens.
Yeah, there's no way he could be. He responded to the call.
Yeah, which is thank goodness, because otherwise I'd be stuck with the whole paranoia of this entire game being like, am I the murderer? Am I about to like get held up for this crime?
I mean, that would be a great twist if they hadn't already written that out of a possibility.
Yeah, it's a cool sort of Damocles to have hanging over your head. Just the like your amnesia and literally not knowing like, well, what have I done? All of the evidence points to not a good thing. So I guess I'm just worried because I want the mystery and ending to be something that's satisfying to me. And it feels like everything's coming together really well. Like, I'm really hoping that those two spots that I cannot find or figure out somehow for a shooting, for like a sniper's position, I'm hoping that actually adds plausibility to another party. Especially since Classier has like involved a mysterious third party, or like given credence to the concept of a third party wanting to take an attempt at her.
I'm really, really curious as to whether or not she's even telling the truth about...
Would you like to hear one of my suspicions, Neil?
I mean, so did you arrest her?
I told her she needs to check in with the station.
I did not arrest her.
Okay, and you also didn't make her do check-ins, or
no? Are those one and the same though? I mean, I wouldn't. I don't know because
the check-ins are a compromise between putting her in cuffs and taking her to the RCM. It's essentially Kim explains like if she doesn't show up, like at these certain times, then there's essentially a manhunt for her. Like,
so. Isn't the problem...
But it does give her an opportunity to escape. It absolutely does.
Okay. Because the problem is if, like, her story is if she shows up with her real identity, that she'll likely be traced and hunted down.
That's right.
That's what she claims, at least.
And yet the check-in, I think she can do under her false identity.
Ah.
Yeah. I believe that there's actually there's quite a bit of fleshing out to the nuance of the check-in versus the straight up arrest. And that's why I avoided the straight up arrest, but thought I can't just be like, hey, you know what? We're cool. Obviously, you have nothing to do here, because my suspicion is that there are supposed to be 3 mercs in the area.
Yeah, we
know
haven't
one
met
is
one
dead.
of them.
We know that I've met the other one.
Right,
and I think
he's the scab leader.
He's super obvious. Who's merc number 3?
I don't know either. You think
Could
it could
be
her?
Classier? I think that's a bit of a stretch. But there hasn't been enough to rule it out either.
But so she showed up before the mercs, though, right?
She did. That doesn't mean that she can't be a merc or a contractor of some sort, right? She's already done spy and espionage work.
It's just the problem I have with that. And no, granted, I like that theory. The problem I have with that theory is not so much it's not so much the creation of the theory or the plausibility of it. The problem I have is if it's true, that means that there is some bad writing, because there are characters that talk about the 3 mercenaries, but also know of Classier. I believe Titus talks about 3 mercenaries. So how would he know about the 3 and not involve Classier?
So that's a good point, and I think that the biggest hole by far is the fact that they're talking about the 3 mercenaries, but I don't know if it's necessarily defined either who all 3 are. Just that those 2 are known to belong to the mercenary crew that came in. It's enough where I think the game would have to essentially acknowledge that it provided red herrings for Classier to be a merc. But it's just something that's kind of been eating at the back of my mind. Man, she just is going to be central to this case no matter what. No matter how we approach solving this, Classier is deeper in it than just being the most present witness to the victim.
I mean, I hope so too, because I have a bad feeling, and part of my potential disappointment, this lingering doubt I have, which propels me to want to finish this game soon so I can be disappointed and put it aside, is that I have a sneaking suspicion that Classier is supposed to be this somewhat tragic character in the regard that she has fallen, whether or not she acknowledges it as love, but she had kind of fallen in love for this man and may or may not have caused his death with their involvement together. But my concern is that it's going to turn out that she was just extremely unlucky with who she picked to be her friends and her party lover, and that her past, the only issue her past has in this whole scenario is that it's the one thing that puts her there at that point in time. And if that's what ends up happening, it doesn't I want there to be some intrigue to it, and it feels too cut and dry, and it feels so the stars magically aligned just perfectly sort of thing. I like plots and crazy mysteries that revolve around stars aligning, but only when it's people that force those stars to be exactly where they needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like too much of coincidence. And again, it's not like it's implausible or impossible, but it just doesn't feel right to have the story of this woman that is on the run because of corporate espionage end up in a town where she then finds herself romantically involved with a mercenary being hired by a union to kind of force, or not a union, sorry, the company to
White
more
Pines.
or less deal with the union and pressure the union only to have one of them murdered in a possible scenario where either of them potentially could have been the targets, although it seems very likely to be the man at this point, given your conceptualization of the crime scene. It just, I don't know, it just, everything falls too well together in a way that does not seem artificial. Like, I want things to fall into place knowing that there was a manipulation that took place.
All of the events seem like greater machinations in one way or another, and not unlikely, but I guess perfect circumstance.
We'll see, man.
Yeah.
We'll see.
It's shaping up to present itself as a grand narrative. So I don't know. I wouldn't worry too much just yet. I'm gonna see how much I can dig up, but I think both of us are gonna try and probably have it done by the next time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm hoping I have it finished today, in fact. Because I gotta
get my gun. I gotta find my gun. I think things are gonna be really bad if I don't find my gun.
I kind of forgot about the gun for a while because I'm trying not to solve anything through violence or threat.
Me too, but I'm so physically weak that I actually think that the gun is the only thing that may keep me alive in the later end.
I mean, it's not like, I don't think the game is going to necessarily hard lock you out of progression, right? So
no, I think the game, if it's been developed correctly, will never provide me with like, I think the game may give me a scenario where it's like, well, you have chosen poorly and this has resulted in your death. But otherwise, I do believe that no matter what, the game finds a path for you to wind through.
I'm getting Katana Zero vibes in regards to there not actually being alternate
false
endings.
Choice. Yeah.
I just have a suspicion that like a game, especially when like the game was lauded as being like very well written, something tells me that like, which I'm not necessarily finding at this point. I've said this before, but I find so much of the dialogue to be so fucking bland. Like
there are a couple of hiccups too, where the dialogue assumes things are one way when they are not.
Yeah.
Like they assume locations that are either no longer true or aren't true yet, which is kind of weird. But I've noticed at least one or two dialogue options where things are being referenced that I'm like, but that's not the state of affairs right now.
Yep. We'll see. We'll see how things go. I don't necessarily have to talk about anything else this week, honestly. Do you have any other games you've played? Or things you've watched?
I haven't played any other games. Very quickly, I watched the Korean film Train to Busan. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I have not.
It's a, I don't want to say classic because it came out in 2016, but it is a zombie film that takes place in South Korea that came out in 2016. It has amazing like special effects, or what should I say? It has amazing CGI that brings me back to the good old days of all of the technical capabilities of like an AMC television show in 2012. So besides besides the bad CGI, it's a very good movie. It's interesting. It's worth watching. It's one of those cool sort of containment narratives where in Train to Busan, the basic premise is that this zombie outbreak happens while a man and his daughter are taking like a bullet train to the South Korean city of Busan. And I don't know where they start out at. I have no idea. I don't think it's ever mentioned, but they are in another large Korean city. That is all that I have to go on. But because they're trapped in this train and the zombie outbreak is happening across the country, it's a very interesting perspective on sort of the zombie genre as a whole. And it has some really fun characters. There's a character I think you would absolutely adore who is essentially just like this sort of He gives me the like meathead delinquent tropes of some like anime and Japanese like media. Truly a delight. Fashionably dressed. Wouldn't be too out of place in a JoJo Bizarre Adventure episode. So good movie. I think it's worth checking out if you're looking for something that's sort of in the, I guess it's horror. I guess it's still primarily the horror genre.
Would you say that the movie has something more to offer than like the stereotypical early 2000s zombie film? Like,
I mean, those films had almost nothing to offer, right? So it's.
I mean, in the same way that, let's say, 28 Days Later was marginally better, depending on who you talk to, than like the majority of the movies that were released around that time.
That's actually true. 28 Days Later is a very good movie, in my opinion.
The whole, I mean, like it's really
This
the
is-
last third of the movie, I think, right? That like starts to form a moral, if you will.
And
with,
the moral of all of these zombie films that end up being good, I think, normally is the exploration of like the monstrosity of human self-interest and behavior.
Yeah.
And Train to Busan explores that quite a bit.
Okay.
There's a very very good explanation or exploration of the like motivations and compromises and like interactions between the people when the pressure of zombies is put upon them. Like our main character at the start of the movie, definitely not a likable guy at all. Like pretty shitty. Like I think he is essentially like a South Korean Wall Street dude, and people do not like him and are kind of mean to him. But it seems like, you know what, he probably deserves it. And like the evolution of that dynamic alone throughout the movie is very good. And in Train to Busan, like it's the man and his daughter as well trying to make this journey. And his relationship with his daughter is very strained as well. And so seeing that relationship develop throughout the movie is, I think it's interesting for me. Some people would even say it's like touching and heartbreaking. But I don't know. I didn't cry. That's all I'm going to say. Not going to cry at that. But that's it, man. I haven't played anything else besides Disco Elysium, and I've just been kind of ruminating on games of 2019. When Cookie's back, I assume we'll do Game of the Year sometime soon.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if we'll do like a special where we just talk about that, make it short, or just do it in a regular episode format. We shall see.
Gotcha.
Comments, questions, corrections, suggestions, podcast at fancyramen.com.
You can watch us play video games on Twitch. Neil is at twitch.tv/fancyramentv. Cookie is at /cookieskimilk, CUKISKMILK. And our friend John is at JFray all day. That's J with a JAY, Frey with a FRAY.
Cookie was streaming a couple days ago too, playing Sea of Thieves.
Oh,
I
nice.
dropped by a little bit for that too. So he does stream again. It is a miracle.
And also tell friends and family about the podcast. Best way for us to grow our listenership is through your wholehearted recommendation.
Have a great New Year, everybody. Happy 2020.
Happy 2020. We'll see you next time.